I work at a local Burger King in my city in Ohio. A few nights ago, I was working the closing shift, which is from 5 p.m. until 10 p.m. It's a shorter shift, but it's the busiest time of the day. Not just because of the rush, but also because all the odd characters seem to come out after sunset. This is the story of the most bizarrely disturbing encounter I've had while working at that Ohio Burger King. So, it must have been only about half an hour until closing. Around this time, the late-night crowd starts to dwindle, allowing us to close down a few booths and get a head start on cleaning before closing time. The restaurant gets quieter and quieter, and it actually seems like we might be able to leave at a reasonable hour, which we're all excited about. You see, we don't get overtime, and they only pay us for 15 minutes after closing. The idea is to prevent us from slacking off and earning a few extra bucks by doing unnecessary work after hours. As I was saying, it's about half an hour before closing when I notice a man walking towards the clear glass double doors. He opens one door, uses the hook to keep it open, and then does the same with the other door so that both sets of doors are wide open, as if he's expecting a crowd to come through. However, instead of a crowd, only one person arrives, though she appeared to be as heavy as 3 or 4 people combined. This woman is in a mobility scooter, or more accurately, overflowing from it. I don't mean to be cruel, but she was objectively a sight that was hard to ignore. She couldn't have weighed less than 600 pounds, and her size was such that she needed an oxygen tank attached to her scooter, with a clear plastic tube running up to her nostrils. She maneuvers her way to the counter with her companion, and he proceeds to order something for her. Something here being the single largest order I've ever taken during my time working there. I mean, it was even more massive than the order from the drunk frat boys who came in one Saturday night. The order total was just under $150 and took us about 20 minutes to prepare. To put that in perspective, our average serving time in that period was around 6 minutes for an entire bag of meals, and this order took 20 minutes with every available staff member pitching in. But that was just the beginning of the ordeal. She scooted over to a table with her companion, who then proceeded to feed her pretty much the entire order in about 10 minutes. It was truly revolting. I couldn't decide what was worse, witnessing the entire scene or seeing the man derive apparent pleasure from creating an enormous mess while feeding her. By the time they left, there were fries and ranch dressing strewn everywhere, on the floor, smeared across the red leather of the booth. Many fries had been crushed underfoot in such a way that it required vigorous scrubbing of the plastic tiling to clean up. This added a significant amount of extra time to our cleanup process. However, that wasn't the part that frightened me. It was how enthusiastically they were engaged in this feeding ritual, how the woman seemed to be hurtling toward an early grave while seemingly enjoying it. I used to work at Burger King as a shift manager while I was still attending night school. Our store was located in a large Walmart shopping center. Every single store in that whole shopping center really hated being next to the Walmart because the general manager happened to be particularly mean and spiteful. For instance, if an issue was reported in his store, like an employee complaining about facilities being broken, he would simply fire the employees who reported the problem instead of actually addressing it like a responsible adult. Consequently, problems often went unresolved until they turned into emergencies, such as when the septic tank backed up and caused a sewage stench in the parking lot for an entire week. If that sounds like a very specific example, it's because it is. It was beyond disgusting. Due to our frustration and subsequent confrontations with him, he couldn't fire us, and our manager disliked him even more than we did. Every year he would express his frustration with the fast food restaurants near him by piling snow from his parking lot into large mounds that blocked the entrances to our parking lots. Yep, he was that kind of guy. Anyway, fast forward 3 months, and it's almost summertime. This incident takes place right in the middle of a busy lunch rush when our parking lot is typically full. During such times, people often park at the far end of the Walmart lot and walk over to our restaurant. On that particular day, multiple customers informed us about a growing fire ant nest in one of the flowery garden islands in the Walmart parking lot. We advised people to be cautious, put up signs, and even called our general manager several times, requesting an exterminator. He explained that we couldn't afford professional exterminators and that he'd contact head office to allocate the necessary funds. He sympathized but couldn't take immediate action. It was frustrating, but sometimes that's how things go. A few days later, a woman with 3 children enters during the lunch rush. The mother is pleasant and orders 1 large meal for herself and 3 kids' meals. Interaction over, right? Wrong. Not even 10 minutes later, the woman returns to the restaurant, looking visibly distressed. I recognized her from her previous visit as being very nice. However, this time, she's not happy. In fact, she looks terrified. My initial thought was that there was an order mistake, where one of her kids was upset about a toy, but as I observed her, it was clear that something was seriously wrong. She was crying uncontrollably, and it seemed like she was trying to hold herself together. I approached her and calmly asked, "May I help you, ma'am?" She struggled to speak amid her sobs, but eventually managed to convey her distress. "My son, fire ants, oh God, please help." I was shocked. I hadn't anticipated anything beyond an irritated adult with a few ant bites threatening a lawsuit. But a child. I immediately sprinted towards the Walmart parking island. There, I saw 2 kids perched on the hood of a car while the third child, a boy, jumped around erratically, crying in pain with tears streaking down his face. His legs were almost completely covered in tiny orange and black fire ants. Even from a distance, it was clear that the ants were crawling all over him, and his legs were covered in red, sore-looking bites. My initial instinct was to use the hose at the back of the restaurant to spray the kids' legs. I remembered my dad doing the same thing for my cousin when she got bitten by fire ants as a child. It worked, but then I realized a major issue with my plan. This had happened in the Walmart parking lot, where they had parked before coming to Burger King. There was no way I could get them to our hose fast enough. Panic set in, and I had to think quickly. I remembered a kid in Texas who had died from fire ant bites a few years earlier, and this situation felt equally dire. The kid in the parking lot looked like he had hundreds of bites. Then I saw the drinks, placed on the car hood in a cardboard carrier. I grabbed them, starting with the mom's large lemonade, and poured them forcefully onto the front of the boy's legs to wash off as many ants as possible. Then I did the same with the 2 small kids' drinks, washing off 99% of the fire ants. The boy was still screaming, but after I cleared the rest of the ants off with my gloved hand, the immediate crisis was over. I instructed the mom to bring the child back to Burger King so I could tend to his injuries using the first aid kit. She gathered up her screaming child, accompanied by her other 2 kids. I led her in through the delivery entrance and rushed to grab the first aid kit. She applied burn cream to his legs while I called 911. The ambulance arrived within 5 minutes. Though the child had stopped screaming, he was still crying. The paramedics took over, and the mother hugged me, thanking me between tears for helping them. 24 hours later, I learned that the Walmart manager had been sued by a local family due to dangerous conditions at his store. He was fired and replaced by an interim manager. An exterminator arrived within a week, and the fire ants were eradicated. All's well that ends well, right? But still, it was undoubtedly one of the scariest moments in my entire Burger King career, which, funnily enough, came to an end shortly thereafter. A few days after my 19th birthday, a few of my buddies and I were cruising around town in one of our cars, passing bottles and generally getting up to no good. We found a spot to park, had a few smokes, and blasted some music, hanging out and goofing around long after the sun had set. Eventually, our hunger got the better of us, so we decided to drive over to Burger King to grab a bite to eat. By this point, I was pretty drunk, and I'll admit, I wasn't exactly on my best behavior. The Burger King drive-thru was inexplicably closed, so we parked the car, got out, and entered the restaurant. At the front of a long line stood a woman who was quite overweight and appeared to be in the midst of an animated complaint about her order, flailing her arm flab around. My buddies and I, being somewhat intoxicated, watched this spectacle unfold for about 10 minutes straight as she made a complete spectacle of herself, holding up the entire line. Finally, she stepped aside to wait for her corrected order, and the line began moving again. The ham beast's antics had irritated everyone in the restaurant, and even the workers behind the counter seemed fed up. When I reached the front to place my order, I was feeling rather cocky and righteous. I thought that if I made the workers laugh by poking fun at the ham beast, I might get a free meal out of it. So, I said something like, "May I apologize on behalf of humanity for the irate snuffling of my heavy friend here?" No one laughed. They all looked shocked, glancing between the ham beast and me, anticipating the fallout. The ham beast turned red, and I braced myself for her outburst. I was prepared for a confrontation, even a black eye if it came to that, as long as my buddies got a good laugh. However, she surprised me by not losing her temper. She didn't say a word, she just stood there, visibly angry. The workers then brought her corrected order, and she sat down to eat. We got our food and sat on the opposite side of the restaurant. While my buddies were congratulating me on the roast, I couldn't help but notice the ham beast. She was on her phone, talking quietly, but occasionally shooting us smug grins. As we left the restaurant, I had no idea what was about to unfold. Suddenly, I heard a voice behind us shouting, "There he is, that one, right there." I turned around, and the ham beast was pointing at me, that same smug grin on her face. And then, a gun was in my face. I can't recall the exact words he was yelling at me, but I knew it was her husband. It's funny how you notice little details in moments of crisis. I distinctly remember his wedding ring on the finger wrapped around the pistol handle. Though I'm not familiar with guns, that thing looked huge. For a moment, I zoned out, staring down the barrel, with his screams echoing in my ears. It was only when he pressed the gun against my forehead that reality snapped back, hitting me like a ton of bricks. I was shaking uncontrollably. When he ordered me to kneel, I struggled to comply. He screamed that I didn't deserve to die on my feet, a line that has stayed with me. I fell to my knees, terrified beyond words. I was so scared that, without realizing it, I wet myself. I hadn't known it was really a thing, people wetting themselves out of fear, but it happened to me. I suppose the combination of alcohol and the large Coke I had consumed contributed. So, in addition to thinking I was about to die in a parking lot, soaked in my own urine, I cowered and shook on my knees outside a Burger King. The man continued to yell, though I can't recall much of what he said. I was waiting for the moment everything would go black, like falling asleep instantly and never waking up. I tried to shout something myself, maybe a plea for someone to call the police, but fear silenced my voice. It was like a living nightmare, the kind where you try to scream but your voice fails you. Suddenly, the word cops caught my attention from a bystander nearby. Then, the ham beast's voice repeated the word, this time with fear in her tone. The gun lifted from the back of my head, and as I mustered the courage to look around, I saw them, the ham beast and her husband, speeding out of the parking lot in a battered old sedan, followed by the wailing of sirens in the distance. As I gave my statement to the police, I realized my buddies were gone, and so was the car. I was driven home in a police car, which revealed to my parents that I had been drinking. To them, my near-death experience took a back seat to my alcohol consumption. They tried to ground me, but I was so shaken that I barely left the house for a week. This incident taught me to be cautious about trying to be funny, as you never know who might react with a gun to your head.